there. So I'd love to kick it off to our first panel, navigating the promotion pyramid.
I'm Siobhan Nealand. I am a senior client lead leadership recruiter here at AWS, actually. I love this building. And I met Nancy before she even became an Amazon. I don't know where, I can't see her. Before she even started working at AWS. And so I've been an AWIP member for a little while now. I've watched it grow. It's one of my favorite women's organizations to support. So I love being here to help facilitate this. So I'll be the facilitator for this panel. And I focus only on hiring women in underrepresented communities for leadership roles and really creating a matchmaking experience. I don't have requisitions. I kind of have a special kind of role here and really try to find the right roles for people here at Amazon. And then in my other life outside of AWS, because AWS is my side hustle, I am the CEO and founder of an organization called One Mama that helps impoverished women have babies safely in places like Uganda. And I have a whole clothing line and makeup line that funds that thing so that I can do this here. So that's a little bit about me. And now I actually want to introduce Irina. Maybe you talk a little bit about where you come from and your title, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm Irina Farouk. I'm a Chief Product Officer. Is this not on?
Yeah, there you go.
I'm a Chief Product Officer at Kinetica. We're an analytics startup that is super cool and I'm hiring, but I'll repeat that later. But similar to Tatiana, I grew up in Russia, or not in Ukraine, but it used to be the same country. We're old enough where it was the same country. And, you know, I've kind of done most of my career in enterprise software, but across all different aspects of it. And here I now get to build my own product org, which is exciting.
My name is Divya. I am the VP of product at a company called Virta Health. We're a diabetes clinic. We reverse diabetes without medications or surgery. I've actually spent most of my career as a founder CEO. And so intermittently, when I've had a real job, it's been in product. So I can tell you a little bit about my more non-traditional path to getting where I am, but super happy to be here.
Yeah, so in this panel, we're going to talk a little bit about the pyramid, inverted pyramid. And, you know, it's kind of interesting for me to moderate this because I'm always on the front end of the recruiting process. So, you know, honestly, the employee piece is not as big in my strong suit. But what I notice is it's the same problem, right? Like, and actually I have a very specialized program. It's a new program. It's only been a year. And I focus 100% on this very issue that what I realize is one of my biggest problems of getting women leaders into roles is not a lot of the things that people think. It's this problem of being able to talk about yourselves. And what I talk about is that, like this week, I just ran an event in DC and leaders that are 25 years in their career at the top tier companies. And it's so interesting, they're doing they're like your products in your hands, they are the ones who are in the front lines making those changes. And they're like, yeah, you know, I didn't really do that much this last year. And I have to coach these candidates to talk about, but did you build an app on the side? Oh yeah, actually I built it on AWS. Okay, how come that's nowhere in your resume? Or like, so I have to coach these women who've been in their career for 30 years, who are running huge organizations, on how to talk about themselves. And so if you can't even do it in the recruiting process, most people aren't actually doing it in the promotion process. And so now I've started asking that part in my recruiting piece. So I'm going to start asking them their questions about like this piece. And one of the things that I feel like is this sort of interesting place is that you get in that automatic pilot place, you just know what product, you know what decisions, you know what you need to do. And you just start coming from that automatic pilot place. And as you start to move up the ladder, you forget how to talk about yourself and what you do. And I notice my male counterparts, they seem to be at each stage, they're talking about what they do. I'm actually in the middle of a promotion process, and I'm one of my male counterparts who's whatever. So, not doing quite as much as I'm doing, but I have my head down doing it. And he is calling out every little thing he's doing. And it's annoying to me, honestly, right? But you know what? He's doing the right thing, and I'm not. Because I have my head doing all this down, working 15 hours doing this. And that is what I see all my candidates doing too. And I'm so mad at myself because the very thing I coach my candidates to do, they're not doing. And this is the thing that I also see now that I'm in the promotion process, all my coworkers that are leaders, the women leaders, I see them doing the same thing with their promotions. And so we're gonna uncover this and a little bit, and you know, I can't wait to hear. I've heard them before on some other panels, and so they have really interesting things. So I'd actually just like to open it up, whichever one you'd like to go first, of like, what's your experience of this inverted triangle around the promotion process?
Well, you know, maybe a little bit of a personal story. So I got out of business school. I got a job that wasn't the right seniority. It was kind of low, but I was going to change the world. So I didn't care because I got a job for a topic I was really passionate about. And my boss at the time said, like, you know, a high-level job is going to open up, you know, very, very soon, and you're going to get it. So we're a year out, and I'm pregnant with my first child. And, you know, you get to a point where you kind of have to declare it. So I go to my boss finally, and, you know, it's kind of, there's a ticking time bomb there. So I go to my boss, and I sit down across from him, and I'm like, well, actually, I'm pregnant, you know, this and that. And then that conversation goes into, oh, actually, we decided to create a manager position. And I go and say, well, I would like to be that manager. And he's like, yeah, I think you're not ready. And there I was in that moment thinking, okay, it's now happening to me, right? The thing that I've read about is gonna happen. Like, my career is over, like, I'm sitting there and kind of thinking through this thing. And needless to say, the next 4 or 5 months were not the funnest part of my professional life. But when I stepped back, I realized that I was never in the running. Number one, everybody on my team was promised that job, so it had nothing to do with me being pregnant. It was actually something to do with the way the organization was managed. But second, I was also not in the driver's seat of my own career. I was a passenger, and I was expecting, against hope, that, you know, all these good things were going to happen to me because I was a good and capable person. So fast forward, my kids are 3.5 years apart. So 3.5 years later and 2 jobs later, I was pregnant with my second child. And thankfully, I wanted to decouple all the signals, so I got the promotion 2 weeks before I had to announce. So I got that out. And then what happened next, what I think was really important, while I was on maternity leave, my boss called me that they were going to give me a very significant out-of-band raise because they knew that I was delivering value. And when I came back, having taken full maternity leave and having 2 young children, I got promoted to a job that was 10x the responsibility of what I had before. And the reason I tell this story, because there's a lot of bad places you could work. There are a lot of bad managers you could work for. There are also a lot of good ones that will appreciate your value. And I think my story of kind of overcoming that pyramid for myself has been putting myself in the driver's seat and knowing that I'm interviewing them for a fit of, will they appreciate the skill set that I bring? Is this the type of organization that's promote? As a leader, I have a responsibility to create an inclusive environment where nobody feels that way. But as an individual, I have to put myself in the driver's seat to help do that. So that's kind of I think a lot of my comments will be framed around that experience of kind of, you have a choice to self-select, is to select the people you want to be with, and then we can make change happen as we get into those positions.
I love that perspective.
So I think I would love to comment on this 2 different ways. So I actually had an experience very similar to Irina's where when I came back from maternity leave after having my second child, within a month I got promoted to a job 10x the responsibility. And at the time I was like, I went from 1 kid and 1 direct report to 2 children and 100 more children at work. I was like, what's happening?
It's not the faint of heart.
Yeah.
So, you know,
it wasn't necessarily smooth sailing, but that did happen. And so I think to Irina's point, it's not all bad. There are a lot of organizations, a lot of managers that do create these opportunities. And if you're in a privileged position to be able to be selective and seek them out, asking the right questions up front and sticking with those folks throughout your career is important. At my current role, our CEO was the CEO that I had previously worked for who gave me that promotion. I'm that was a big part of me wanting to join Verda in my new role. I guess to comment on Siobhan's kind of earlier point, though, I think the observation of just this happening was most stark for me in my previous role. And, you know, I think we all hear this happening, but I actually saw this unfolding where we were in a calibration meeting. We were doing promotions across a bunch of different teams. And I noticed that on one particular team, the women were all low in the 9 box. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the 9 box. And the men were all higher. And when I was kind of replaying the tape in my mind, I noticed that the things that folks were saying about the men and the women were exactly the same, yet where they ended up in that 9 box was very different. And I said something about it. And I think when I said something, everyone around the table was nodding their head. And they were like, yeah, that's true. I noticed that too. And I'm like, then why did no one else say anything about it? And so I think that for a lot of folks, these biases exist. And I've noticed as in a leadership position that I absolutely have them too. And so I think just being able to be aware that they exist and call them out and say something about it is just a really big part of the process, but it's only step one, because I think in spite of actively trying to fight these biases, like at times, like just last week, I was thinking about who in my team to promote, and I was just like, I don't think I'm making an objective decision here. So I think just bringing objectivity to it is important and like very deeply ingrained. I don't remember what question I'm answering though.
Personal content.
Yeah, those are my 2 personal anecdotes around this.
So I think another question then is like, what are the things that you're seeing that are the obstacles when as you're bringing your staff and you're up and for promotions? Like I know for me, one of the things that I really are noticing is, you know, again, a little bit what I was talking about before is just women being advocates for themselves and the things that they want, and being, like you were talking about, in control of your career. Like instead of waiting, that whole waiting thing of like, well, somebody's going to see what a great job I'm doing and then they'll do it instead of asking for it. So maybe talk through like how you're mentoring some of your team members that you hire and how you work through that.
I have to be careful what I say. Some of my team members are here. I'm just kidding. They know where I stand and everything. But I'll tell you from personal experience, there was one time where I got my performance review. I got promoted at the end of it. I had everything exceptional in one area of suggested improvement. And the area of suggested improvement was self-promotion. Literally, my boss, who was a man, I've never worked for a woman, had called out self-promotion as a skill that I had to work on. And it was a wake-up call for me personally because, well, women especially, but a lot of actually, I find that even when I manage men, actually the most competent men in my team are the ones that don't brag or don't self-promote, right? And it's actually the ones who I'm not planning to promote who are like, oh, look what I did. Are you going to promote me? I'm like, congratulations, you get to keep your job, right? So here we go, right? And so a lot of the times, and I think part of it is I see it in a lot of ways, my responsibility as a leader to help my team both develop the skills, but also people trust the message more when it comes from a third-party source. So when you brag about it, you know, or talk about it, and especially when you're a minority or you're a woman, it's actually, people diminish the value of that statement. But if somebody else brags about you, then all of a sudden it's valuable. That's why for women, it's actually, you know, women are very, like, encouraged to collect degrees. Like, I have degrees to, like, hang, you know, fill up the wall, right? And part of it is because somebody else says you're really good, right? And so part of it is actually, I see it as my responsibility to give that voice and to expose and give credit to the people on my team, whether they're men or women, and so then they can kind of fall into that environment. But when it comes to promotion, it's different because, I mean, sometimes you don't have room to promote, right? If you're going from product manager to senior product manager, you can kind of, you have a very defined career path. But if you have a step function jump, like a director, VP, a C-level, there may be no job. There may be no place to promote. It doesn't mean you can't work on your skills to get to the next level. And what you can do is have a conversation of what are the next set of skills or experiences. And that's why a lot of times, even for myself, I've never asked for promotion. I've always asked for experiences. And I find that titles equalize themselves to the experiences and to your peer group. Because if you find yourself driving something with everybody else who is a level above you, it's only a matter of time till you be at the same level. But if you get those experiences, so today in my current company, eventually I want to be a CEO. There's no CEO, I'm a chief product officer. Like there's no job, I'm not gonna be the CEO here, but I can still have an open conversation with our CEO of like, what are the next set of experiences that he can bring me into that help prepare for that job and I can help them. And so I think as leaders, you kind of have to help your team get the experiences that by the time they're up in front of the committee, everybody knows who they are and they've seen them do things way above their level, where it's kind of a done deal. Like you're not really, the vote is just a stamp of approval because you know how the committee is gonna vote. Because if you don't know and you have a minority or female candidate, like the odds are stacked against you, right? And so that's kind of my approach to that.
So your question was just around challenges in the promotion pyramid?
What are the things, the challenges, and what are you doing to encourage both women, especially minorities, to do the promotion process?
Yeah, so one of the challenges that I've observed kind of a little bit more recently is I think actually pretty specific to being in product. So I think that might be relevant for this group. And this is a little bit nuanced, so I'm going to try to make sense. So I think a lot of product management is working cross-functionally, collaborating, and building relationships. And one of the pieces of feedback that I hear way more often about women than about men is so-and-so is great, but they're hard to work with, right? And I think that that statement is very fraught with bias. I think that to the point that Siobhan and Arena made, there are certain things that a man can do and then a woman can do, and a woman will rub someone the wrong way when they do that exact same thing. And they will end up in this hard to work with bucket. So I hear that feedback from folks, and I do 360s on my managers and whatever, and I'm just like, okay, I'm hearing this feedback that they're hard to work with or they're not a good collaborator, but they're, checking all of the other boxes. But at the end of the day, that perception is actually preventing them from having impact, right? And so I think that that is always a struggle in creating this promotion pyramid for people that might be perceived different ways, because the bias is unfair, but it is tangibly affecting performance, right? And it may or may not be this person's fault. And so then I'm like, well, who needs to change? I'm like, ideally the system would change, but on one hand you want to coach this person and say, here are some things you might need to change about yourself, but it's totally unfair. If this person looked different or acted different, or I guess, looked different or were different, they wouldn't need to do that. So I don't think I'm coming to y'all with a solution, but this is a problem that might help kind of provide empathy for the folks. There are some tangible reasons that these things do happen. And so I don't know if you have any solution.
Comment on that one thing, and product is hard because sometimes there's no tangible things, or it's very hard to manage. What I try to kind of counteract those things is actually try to solve it, and I hate process, but try to solve it with process. Yep. Try to solve with very concrete checkpoints and things and deliverables where you can actually see value, right? Yeah. And then the value is very objective, and you can do that it's not like, well, that person invited me to a meeting this way, but I didn't want to show up because they're not collaborative and they didn't they asked me via Slack and I prefer a phone call. It's like, no, these things are happening. Like there is a process that you have to show up and you have to do, and there's deliverables. And deliverables has a very concrete kind of set of checklists. It's hard because we want to innovate and we want to do new things. And so you catch a lot of the kind of baseline things in that. And then you ideally want to give each person who's high potential one opportunity to just stand out, do something above their current role where you can showcase them in that capacity where they're not as under the microscope of all the kind of other things.
Yeah.
It's funny because, obviously whether it's recruiting or whether it's in the actual employee process, I think it's similar. It's when I find candidates that have sort of this sort of, at Amazon, we have the quirky personality that we can kind of go with, if you don't know about that. But like there are certain candidates that just don't follow through the interviewing process very well. And so what I really do is part of my program is coaching them through like, okay, what is it you really like, where have been the successes and where not? And a lot of times it is these sort of like, I'm one of those personalities that's very driven, right? A little bit more like a man than a woman, honestly. And I will just like, I like a bulldog. When I get my teeth on it, I just like, and so I can really relate to other women or anybody like that, honestly. And so I will coach them because in certain types of teams, they will not be successful and they will not make it through the process, right? So coaching them, like, so now also as a recruiter being responsible to like finding them. So I would think as a manager, you're wanting to help them find, okay, maybe they'd be a better fit with this team over here. You're kind of almost matchmaking of like this particular project might be better suited for them. You're probably gonna do more of those things. And I see that's where, you know, the people that I see getting promoted in organizations are, they're matched really well. And I think, especially from a women personality thing, like I feel like as a recruiter, I am taught to look at resumes like this. I've been told, I'm just learning to undo that. And what this is honestly a male trajectory, right? You go through this career, you go to this career. Most women's resumes are like this. They've got three degrees, they've 5 different job families, people who come from different cultures or other countries. It's a hoop-de-hoop. They also got that. And so I think it's the same thing goes when you go into, and as an employee, you start doing all these things and then you don't know how to tie in all your promotion pieces of that. And so what I'm curious to see is when you see like these kinds of challenges like you just had, where you described, how can we, one, help each other? And how do we, one, be advocates for each other, but also either pull people up or pull people towards something and support each other a little bit more in this promotion process as a community?
Okay. Go ahead. Did you want to answer?
You can answer.
Well, it's interesting. I'm kind of double-minded about what you just said about kind of women being too aggressive or etc. Because you don't, you know, people that end up leaders are those that don't necessarily fit the norms, right? And you want to, people eventually want to follow you because you have a very strong perspective and you have a strong set of cultural beliefs and things. And so, you know, when we say, like, I've been in situations where my peers would say, oh, you're too aggressive. I would go to my boss and said, do you think I'm too aggressive? And he's like, no, continue being the way you are, right? And so finding that opportunity to be that, there is, and so where I draw the line is I'm very cognizant about culture, and culture is the most important thing. And things like respect, open-mindedness, and things, I will enforce them. I will give people immediate feedback on when they've crossed those lines and why it's not okay. But I won't necessarily have them change who they are, right? Or kind of try to make them into people that are exactly like them. Because then they're all going to be the same. They're going to be happy, but they may not be the most innovative team or the most successful team. And so I think
that friction does cause a little bit more.
It does.
Right?
It does put more on sometimes in leadership because you kind of have to mediate conflicts and there's a lot of initial friction and people don't get along. But as long as they come with the same cultural beliefs and they're all respectful and there's, you know, the same culture, I do think you can get these things to work. And when they do, it's a much higher impact. So I don't necessarily coach people like be less aggressive. I'm like, you can't disrespect somebody, but you can kind of try be you in that context.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, actually, in that, you know, when you're coaching somebody, you need to stay within the bounds of their personality and what they're bringing to the table. And I know that I have a very specific style, and I know that wouldn't work for many of the folks on my team, men or women, and some of them it would. And I think this is a really, I think this is part of what's brought us to this point, is that I think there are so many male leaders out there that any young man can look at this multitude of them and find one that they relate to, right? And they can emulate it. Whereas I think that if you're a woman, there's a handful of women up there, but if none of them really match your style, then you're just like, okay, now what does this mean for me, right? Like, what does asserting myself look like? Like, I can't do what she's doing. Like, I've heard someone come to me say, well, I'm not like you, what am I supposed to do? And I was like, I don't know. You know, I had to get a little bit more creative. And so I think the emergence of more women leaders is important and finding someone to emulate. And I know that for me, at a previous role, there was a woman leader in the company that had a very similar personality to mine. And I was like, all right, I can do that. I was like, now I get what it means to be a leader and have a personality like mine. It was just very, very helpful and specific. And so I think seeking that out a little bit and like maybe potentially helping teammates find that person, whether it's at your company or elsewhere, and like creating a very thoughtfully matched mentorship relationship can be very helpful because style is so personal.
Yeah. I think that authenticity, I think, is the key to all of it, whether it's in the recruiting process or the promotion process, like helping as a manager find your authenticity, and as when you're going through the promotion process, the more authentic I am, the people seem to more, I feel more strong about who I am, and then I can go through, ask for a promotion or those kinds of things. So I think we're ready for questions, right, Nancy? Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Would love some advice either creatively or more tactically about people who are on teams that really aren't structured for promotions, whether it be a lateral promotion or just no plans for growth. You know, I personally have been looking at sort of like new ways to grow my career outside of a lateral promotion or sort of new definitions of promotion. Not to say it's not frustrating, but just sort of curious for feedback on sort of ways to create your own growth when there aren't opportunities already, established on the team.
Do you guys have ideas? I mean, I have one thing. I mean, I have 4 businesses outside of what I do for recruiting, right? Like, I like being a founder. I like being a CEO, but I don't get to do that stuff as much in the corporate world. So I go do it there. And then I also get to do really cool stuff in corporate. Now, I don't know, then I fall into the trap of being a woman who does too much, right? So I'm struggling with that life balancing, and it's my own thing. But I think they all have some really interesting things probably too about how you do it within the corporate structure.
Well, I think if you're committed to a place you're at, one thing I always do, I always work on 1 or 2 projects that are not part of my official scope, right? And that's mostly because I want to address things that are not being addressed. And a lot of the times the leaders know there are problems, they just don't have the cycles or the people to solve them. And you can't be the next person coming in and saying this is broken because they know. But if you're the person that comes to the table with ideas and saying, I've researched this is how I can fix it, and especially if you get a peer group together that have thought through this, that's what I found. I've kind of had success is shaping my own roles or creating new roles through my career, and that has been the most effective way.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly that. And I do a lot of that as well, which is, all right, like I see one of my peers struggling with a problem, and it's just, well, how can I help? And they're like, well, you can't. And I'm like, okay, well, can you just include me in some of the next few meetings? I'd love to get a sense for what's going on with this. And then there usually are ways that you can help. There are ways that you can, do some research, talk to folks in your network, find folks in your extended network, learn a little bit more about the problem and bring something to the table. But I think to Siobhan's point, that puts you at risk of taking on a problem that maybe you didn't intend to take on. So, it's walking that line. But I think it's just, don't worry about stepping on toes. Like, I just feel like that's probably the best way to expand your scope and kind of figure out what that toe stepping line is.
And I say also do it from an authentic place. Like, I see people who try to just get promotions, and so they just start helping in lots of places, and it doesn't feel very authentic. I think it's really, I'm sure you guys are both nodding your heads as a leader, watching the people who are actually doing it from a genuine, like, hey, this is a problem I'm really excited about solving. I think those are those places, and whether it's in the recruiting process or the promotion process, I think that's it. So how many more questions you would like? Okay. Yeah?
I have one specific question for Arena. I think one of the things I've observed as a man myself is men are promoted on basis of potential, and for women it's much harder. It's not on potential, they have to earn it. So in your organizations or in your experiences, how do you scale this? How do you make this level playing field? And I'm a brand ambassador here, so I feel very strongly about it. So what are the kind of things organizations should do in order to create this level playing field? That men and women, irrespective of whoever is getting promoted, there is a good sense of potential as well as,
it's interesting. One of the things it's the familiarity, right? And if I am in a lead product role and I have Dipti here who is a senior product leader in the team, like nobody going through the promotions could think, oh, a woman can't lead product, right? Or can't lead a significant part of the product. So part of it is having a diverse
diverse team and kind of driving that, but diversity, not like checkmark diversity. It's real diversity where you had a legitimate seat at the table and you've been chosen for legitimate reasons that I think perpetuates, and then just giving people those opportunities. I really the one thing that for me, when I've managed larger orgs and larger companies, it's giving managers the tools to see themselves as coaches, not as managers. Because if they see themselves as coaches and they don't feel threatened about their own jobs, if they can help develop other people, then people float to the top. And I think it's diversity at the top and then kind of mentorship through the organization.
I'll just add one additional thing to that. And I think you make a really good point about potential. A very tactical thing we've tried to do, especially in leadership recruiting, is we try to make it a point to hire for the next 12 to 18 months instead of for the next 5 years. And that really does open up the pool. And I think what I've found is if we want a candidate that has already done it at 3x the scale, like it's all men, right? And if you want to find people that have already done it, like the pool gets more and more and more narrow. And so I think the way I like to think about it is taking bets on people. So can you find that woman who almost definitely was passed up for promotion several times, because there's a ton of them hiding in there. And I think that if you kind of reduce the forward-looking scope, the team can get a little bit more comfortable and say, okay, maybe this person has not been a VP of a 500-person company, but she's been a director leading a 100-person team. I think she can get to 150, 200. Let's take a bet on this person. Because I think people do that for men all the time, to your point. So I think it's...
The one thing to your point, what I've seen is a lot of women get head of title. They don't get real titles. It's infuriating. Like every time I've been offered one, I've rejected it. I basically said, you name it what it is, for whatever it is, 18 months, it's a hedge. If you're hedging, let's have a real conversation about what that hedge is. Let's put all the cards on the table, let's talk through it, and then we can see if we can compromise on what that hedge looks like. But I'm not gonna be your hedge with a lot of kind of that uncertainty, and I advise a lot of women, have that honest conversation. Take the lower title, but make sure that you understand what that roadmap for the organization and for you looks like.
Any other questions? I thought I saw one over here. Yeah, hi. Yeah, you. So she was asking if they can share some of the career failures.
I've had to walk away from a job that I really liked, felt passionate about, and thought that it was, it was really important. But at the same time, when you get kind of senior enough, if you don't align on strategy and you can't be a cheerleader, you're not the right person to lead that. And I was in a position where I was convinced, and it did, in retrospect, turn out to be the right strategy, but I couldn't get the buy-in. And I'm like, I'm persuasive person. Like, I've sold these things before, but sometimes it's not your call and it's not your decision, and you need to know what you can sign up for, no matter how painful it is. So, but it helped me actually understand my role broader and helped me define which battles am I gonna fight and when do I know that it's time to walk away and do something new, which is a key skill that a lot of leaders, end up stumbling along those lines, and you have to revisit and readjust those things.
I think for me, my previous role was probably not the best fit for me, and I think I kind of came to that realization in a kind of roundabout way, and I'm probably still trying to unpack what exactly it was. I think it was I got into that role through an acquisition of my startup, and so I went from being the CEO of a very small company to kind of like a mid-level PM at a much larger company. And I think it was like a combination of ego, execution, and an inability to work for someone I didn't really respect that was just like my downfall. It was just a bad combo, and I would have liked to have said that I persevered and tried to figure it out, but I just bailed on it. And I don't know if that was the right call, but I learned a lot from that experience. Definitely a failure, though.
So I have a perspective from I ask most candidates about what's exciting to them, what they're passionate about, and kind of where are their regrets in their career, and it kind of helps me give me perspective of what they're really passionate about. Especially working for AWS, everybody wants to work here, right? So they're like, hey, I saw this role, I have you this role, And I'm like, yeah, but you've been a leader of leaders for 10 years. Why do you want an individual contributor role? Oh, but I just want to be at AWS. I'm like, so I have to coach candidates often. And sometimes another recruiter will jump in and they'll take them and they'll take a role. And then they leave pretty quickly because they really didn't take the right role. They really didn't ask themselves those. And so I ask all my candidates, like right now I have a candidate who's been at IBM for 25 years. This will be a huge shift. And we got an offer out to her. And I was like, I need you to write your pros and cons of what coming here means for you. And we'll have a conversation. I don't want to give you an offer until we really talk this out. And I really career coach her through this. Because this is a big deal. And I think as women, we think like, I just went in the door, right? I hear so many people, I just went in the door of whatever. And XYZ company or a situation, and then you don't really look at like, what do I actually want? What role, what career path do I really want? Like we were both talking about is really carving out a career path for yourself. That's where I see the biggest mistake that people make in their career is that they all of a sudden are no longer on that career path that they had or whatever they were excited about. So really, that was my big suggestion to you is really ask yourselves, what am I passionate about, right? Like I should be a director of staffing. I can't stand meetings. I want to be on the front lines and talk to candidates. So I really had that conversation with myself of like, what do I want? And I actually love recruiting, even though I'm in the nonprofit sector and I like that too, but staying in the mix of this keeps me excited about that other stuff. And so I had to have those conversations with myself. So because I made a lot of mistakes earlier on, that I think that was when I started to make those choices. And I think, Nancy, we're done? Yeah? All right, so we're all done. Thank you, guys.